Today we're going to talk about how poverty is artificial. At least in North America, poverty is artificial, and there are ways to force people into poverty internationally. This is why economic sanctions are considered a form of war, because you can artificially induce poverty. So we're going to look at, you can just Google search and I'm looking at two cameras here, so you'll see my eyes shifting. Google search is the United States dollar backed by gold. And one of the things that pops up is federalreserve.org. And this is from, federalreserve.gov. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank. You see where it says up here, I know it's hard to see on there. Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, provides the nation with a safe, flexible, and stable monetary and financial system. This is straight from their website. Is U.S. currency still backed by gold? Federal Reserve notes are not redeemable in gold, silver, or any other commodity. Federal Reserve notes have not been redeemable in gold since January 30th, 1934. And the Congress amended Section 16 of the Federal Reserve Act to read, "The said Federal Reserve note shall be obligations of the United States," which means debt of the United States. "They shall be redeemed in lawful money on demand at the Treasury Department of the United States in the city of Washington, District of Columbia, or at any Federal Reserve Bank. Federal Reserve notes have not been redeemable in silver since the 1960s. Now here, this is from congress.gov. This is House Resolution 9175. So if you just Google search House Resolution 9175, it'll pop up on congress.gov. It is to define the dollar as a fixed weight of gold and for other purposes. It was introduced October 7th, 2022. And it was referred to the House Committee on Financial Services. And you'll see here, this is the congressional findings. It says Congress finds the following. The Federal Reserve note has lost more than 30% of its purchasing power since the year 2000 and 97% of its purchasing power since the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Under the Federal Reserve's 2% inflation objective, the dollar loses half of its purchasing power every generation or 35 years. Let me see. Under the gold standard, through 1913, the United States economy grew at an annual average of 4%, one-third larger than the growth rate since then, and twice the level since the year 2000. The Federal Reserve's trickle-down policy expands the money supply, expanding the money supply, has primarily enriched the owners of financial assets, while it has endangered the jobs, wages, and savings of blue-collar workers. So blue-collar workers just means anyone that does any type of physical labor. So if you're like the CEO of a bank, you're not a blue-collar worker. If you're a mechanic, you are a blue-collar worker. If you stack shelves, you're considered a blue-collar worker. If you work at a register, you're considered a blue-collar worker. So basically, white-collar and blue-collar is... White-collar essentially means you use your mind to work, and blue-collar means you use your physical body to work. Um, but yeah, let's talk about this first clause of the Federal Reserve note has lost 30% of its purchasing power since the year 2000 and 97% of its purchasing power since the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Let me see. They used to have the previous gold acts used to have a finding in it that because of what they did, they caused the Great Depression. Let me see if I can find that real fast. It should be House Resolution 25. I think. Oh no, 5404. Sure, show you the difference. And again, it's congress.gov. Close that. So this is House Resolution 5404 to define the dollar as a fixed weight of gold. This was in 2018. You see where it says 96% as opposed to 97%. You see where it says right here, number 10, the International Gold Exchange Standard from 1914 to 1971 did not provide for a United States dollar convertible into gold and therefore helped cause the Great Depression and stagflation. So when you read this resolution, 5404, that part is omitted in the new resolution 9175, which is the same resolution to make the United States dollar backed by gold. And in it, this is House Resolution 9175. You see, restoring American middle class prosperity requires change in monetary policy authorized to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the Constitution. And that same thing appears in House Resolution 5404, just as number 12, as opposed. Oh no, it is still number 12. Let's see. They just got rid of the part where it talked about stagflation. Under the gold standard through 1913, the United States economy grew at annual average of 4%, one-third larger. But anyway, you see where they're basing the authority on the Constitution, and this is what Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says. Let me zoom in. Pretty sure you still can't see it, but anyway. This is from constitution.congress.gov. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5. So it reads that Congress shall have the power, and then there's a semicolon, and then it goes into these clauses. To coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standards of weights and measures. So according to the Constitution, the United States dollar is supposed to be either coins or a transmitting medium that is backed by the coins or represents the coins. So here's an example. This right now is the United States dollar, also known as the Federal Reserve Note, and according to federalreserve.gov, this is not backed by gold or silver. This, however, and I know they look very similar, but they're not. This is a silver certificate. Silver certificate. Silver certificate. All right. Silver certificate. This is a Federal Reserve note. Federal Reserve note. So they're two different things. This says $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. This says $1. read it again. In silver, payable to the bearer on demand. So, and I've done this in other videos, mostly on the videos where I talk about fractional reserve banking. I read the specific orders from the president barring the hoarding of gold coins, and this was in 1933. And remember, the Congress had admitted that them ending the gold standard caused Great Depression and stagflation. Because whereas this says $1, it's actually worthless. There's nothing. It doesn't stand on anything. There's nothing of value attached to it, right? And they've admitted that it's lost 97% of its purchasing power, which means it's worthless. So this $1, which is 100 pennies, lost 97 pennies. So this is worth 3 pennies. This, if it was still backed by silver, this would always be the value of silver, no matter if the value of the silver went up or down. Whereas Congress has admitted that this loses its value every 35 years. And this is why they, you'll hear certain people talking about financial resets and everything, because they have to continuously reset the value. And all they really do is, because of inflation, they increase the cost of living, and then they'll in name only increase the alleged value of the dollar. And it's not really an increase. It's just they're equalizing it with what the economy is doing. So, you know how our parents used to talk about how, well, we used to be able to get 20 pounds of groceries for a nickel. So because they got rid of the gold standard, that nickel that used to be actually made of nickel is now no longer made of nickel. It's made of something else and has no value, right? So this is what they talk about stagflation. So stagflation is, it's a compound word. The words are stagnant and inflate or inflation. So stagflation means something is stagnant, but something else is going up. So an example that all of us are experiencing is 2 years ago. I'm just going to throw out a number. 2 years ago, we used to be able to get, let's say, 100 pounds of groceries for $100, right? Now, we can only get 50 pounds of groceries for that same $100, and the amount of money that we're getting is not increasing. So if you make $500 a month 2 years ago, and you can get 100 pounds of groceries for $100. Now, 2 years later, you still only get $500 a month. But instead of getting 100 pounds of groceries for $100, you only get 50 pounds of groceries for $100. So the value has inflated, which means it's worthless. But the amount that you get has stayed the same, which means it's stagnant. That's stagflation. And that's how they induce poverty within North America. Because if it was actually backed by something, whenever you look at gold and silver, whatever the silver's worth is what it's worth. It will never decrease in value, even if you melt it into a triangle, even if you melt it into a square, even if you melt it into a ring, even if you melt it into a book, the shape of a book. The value of it stays the same. It doesn't matter what shape it's in. You know what I'm saying? Even if you wet it, it's still silver. If you wet this, it's no longer what it appears to be, even though it's already worthless, right? So when you have currency or a transmitting medium that is backed by something, the value of it stays the same. It will never, and even if it goes down, it still goes down with the economy or with the cost of living. This, as opposed to being affected by the economy, this affects the economy. Whereas silver, on the other hand, and gold, on the other hand, is the economy, right? So it goes with the economy. So as gold and silver goes up or down, the cost of living will move with it. So it's equal, right? But with the United States dollar not backed by anything, as it goes down, the cost of living goes up. Because now you can't get the 100 pounds of groceries for $100. Now you can only get 50 pounds of groceries for $100, which means your cost goes up, but what you're getting is the same. So again, if you only make $500 a month, and this is just, a simple example, if you understand how they're doing this deliberately. If you only got $500 a month 3 years ago, and you were able to get the 100 pounds of groceries for $100, then you were living comfortably then. But now 2 years later, you're still only getting $500 a month, but instead of getting 100 pounds of groceries for $100, you only get 50 pounds of groceries for $100. So now your cost of living goes up, because in order to get the full 100 pounds of groceries, you have to pay double, but you're still only getting $500 a month. That's stagflation, and that's how they artificially induce poverty. And the Constitution prohibits this. And I'll show you an example. If you just Google search Craig versus the state of Missouri. I'm pretty sure it's a Supreme Court case. It is a Supreme Court case. This is from supreme.justia.com. Let me see. I don't know if that's the word I should be looking for. Strawberry. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Let's start here. So again, this is from supreme.justia.com. So it starts off by saying, what is a bill of credit? What did the Constitution mean to forbid? In its enlarged and perhaps its literal sense, the term bill of credit may comprehend any instrument by which a state engages to pay money at a future day, thus including a certificate given for money borrowed. But the language of the Constitution itself, and the mischief to be prevented, which we know from the history of our country, equally limit the interpretation of the terms. The word emit is never employed in describing those contracts by which a state binds itself to pay money at a future day for services actually received or for money borrowed for present use, nor are instruments executed for such purposes in common language denominated bills of credit. To emit bills of credit conveys to the mind the idea of issuing paper intended to circulate through the community for its ordinary purposes as money, which paper is redeemable at a future day. This is the sense in which the terms have always been understood. At a very early period of our colonial history, the attempt to supply the want of the precious metals by a paper medium was made to a considerable extent, and the bills emitted for this purpose have been frequently denominated bills of credit. During the War of our Revolution, we were driven to this expedient and necessity compelled us to use it to a most fearful extent. The term has acquired an appropriate meaning, and bills of credit signify a paper medium intended to circulate between individuals and between government and individuals for the ordinary purposes of society. Such a medium has been always liable to considerable fluctuation. Now, just to pause real fast and go back to what Congress is saying today. Well, again, this is 2022, October 7th of 2022. It says that the Federal Reserve note has lost more than 30% of its purchasing power since 2000 and 97% of its purchasing power since the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Under the Federal Reserve's 2% inflation objective, the dollar loses half of its purchasing power every generation or 35 years. So what they were saying in 1830 about why the United States dollar is gold and silver coin and not paper as a circulating medium is because such a medium has always been liable to considerable fluctuation, which is exactly what we're dealing with right now, with the economic problems that we have right now, although it is artificially induced deliberately. Its value is continually changing, and these changes, often great and sudden, expose individuals to immense loss, are the sources of ruinous speculations, and destroy all confidence between man and man. To cut up this mischief by the roots, a mischief which was felt through the United States and which deeply affected the interest and prosperity of all, the people declared in their Constitution that no state should emit bills of credit. If the prohibition means anything, if the words are not empty sounds, it must comprehend the emission of any paper medium by a state government for the purpose of common circulation. So this is unconstitutional, is essentially what the Supreme Court is saying, because the Constitution forbids it. Let me see. Let's see where else. But it is contended that though these certificates should be deemed bills of credit, according to the common acceptation of the term, they are not so in the sense of the Constitution because they are not made a legal tender. The Constitution itself furnishes no countenance to this distinction. The prohibition is general. It extends to all bills of credit, not to bills of a particular description. That tribunal must be bold indeed, which, without the aid of other explanatory words, could venture on this construction. It is the less admissible in this case because the same clause of the Constitution contains a substantive prohibition to the enactment of tender laws. The Constitution therefore considers the emission of bills of credit and the enactment of tender laws as distinct operations, independent of each other, which may be separately performed. Both are forbidden. To sustain the one, because it is not also the other, to say that bills of credit may be emitted if they are not made a tender in payment of debts, is, in effect, to expunge that distinct independent prohibition and to read the clause as if it had been entirely omitted. We are not at liberty to do so. The history of paper money has been referred to for the purpose of showing that its great mischief consists in being made a tender, and that therefore the general words of the Constitution may be restrained to a particular intent. Was it even true that the evils of paper money resulted solely from the quality of its being made a tender? This court would not feel itself authorized to disregard the plain meaning of words in search of a conjectural intent to which we are not conducted by the language of any part of the instrument, but we do not think that the history of our country proves either that being made a tender in payments of debt is an essential quality of bills of credit, or the only mischief resulting from them. It may indeed be the most pernicious, right? Pernicious, sure, but that will not authorize a court to convert a general into a particular prohibition. Let me see what else we see here. Paper money was also issued in other colonies, both in the North and South, and whether made a tender or not, was productive of evils in proportion to the quantity emitted. Congress emitted bills of credit to a large amount and did not, perhaps could not, make them a legal tender. This power resided in the states. In May 1777, the legislature from Virginia passed an act for the first time making the bills of credit issued under the authority of Congress a tender as to extinguish interest. It was not until March 1781 that Virginia passed an act making all the bills of credit which had been emitted by Congress and all which had been emitted by the state a legal tender in payments of debt. Yet they were, in every sense of the word, bills of credit. Previous to that time, and were productive of all the consequences of paper money. We cannot then assent to the proposition that the history of our country furnishes any just argument in favor of that restricted construction of the Constitution for which the counsel for the defendant in error contends. The certificates for which this note was given, being in truth bills of credit in the sense of the Constitution, we are brought to the inquiry: is the note valid in which they form the consideration? It has been long settled that a promise made in consideration of an act which is forbidden by law is void. Let me read that one more time. It has been long settled that a promise made in consideration of an act which is forbidden by law is void. It will not be questioned that an act forbidden by the Constitution of the United States, which is the supreme law, is against law. Now, the Constitution forbids a state to emit bills of credit. The loan of these certificates is the very act which is forbidden. It is not the making of them while they lie in the loan offices, but the issuing of them, the putting them into circulation, which is the act of emission, the act that is forbidden by the Constitution. The consideration of this note is the emission of bills of credit by the state. The very act which constitutes the consideration is the act of emitting bills of credit in the mode prescribed by the law of Missouri, which act is prohibited by the Constitution of the United States. Cases which we cannot distinguish from this in principle have been decided in state courts of great respectability and in this court. In the case of Springfield Bank versus Merrick, 14 Mass. 322, a note was made payable in certain bills, the loaning or negotiating of which was prohibited by statute, inflicting a penalty for its violation. The note was held to be void. Had this note been made in consideration of these bills instead of being made payable in them, it would not have been less repugnant to the statute and would consequently have been equally void. In Hunt versus Knickerbocker, that is a funny name, 5 John 3:27, it was decided that an agreement for the sale of tickets in a lottery, not authorized by the legislature of the state, although instituted under the authority of the government of another state, is contrary to the spirit and policy of the law and void. The consideration on which the agreement was founded being illegal, the agreement was void. And when you read this entire case, you'll see this case originated out of Craig borrowing $200 from the state of Missouri and a certificate emitted as a circulating medium. And the Supreme Court in 1830 said that was unconstitutional, because to emit a paper as a circulating medium, not backed by anything, is unconstitutional and barred by the Constitution itself, which specifies that a state shall not emit any bills of credit. And to make them a tender is unconstitutional. Does this word really appear that many times? And you'll see right here on the Federal Reserve note, it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And we can see from the Supreme Court case that constitutes the emission of the bills of credit and is unconstitutional because the value of it is subject to considerable fluctuation, which means one day it's actually $1, the next day it's not. Which means, you can buy something one day, and the person that gave you money, or let's say you sold something for $500, and that day the value of $500 is $500. But then the next day, the value of it inflates, and now your $500 is really $200. You just got played. That's why the Constitution prohibits the emission of bills of credit. And again, this is Craig versus Missouri, 29 U.S. 410. And what they talked about 1830, we see with every conversation about the economy, that the fact that it's in circulation is why it's so dangerous, because it's not worth anything, and it never was worth anything. And how it enriches, let's see what the Congress said. It that's where it talked about blue collar workers. The Federal Reserve trickle-down policy of expanding the money supply has primarily enriched the owners of financial assets, while it has endangered the jobs, wages, and savings of blue-collar workers. Why is that? Because if I'm part of a member bank of the Federal Reserve, or if I invest in the Federal Reserve Bank, and I have some type of assets within there, these people just print as much as they want. So if they print $1 trillion, you're not getting any of that money, unless you have some type of interest in the bank, which most of us don't. Most of us are just what members of the alleged conscious community will call our sheep. We're just victims of the system. We don't actually benefit from it. So all these, Fortune 500 people, all these billionaires and millionaires that already understand that this system is corrupt, of course they're going to invest in it, because that's how they get rich. They get rich off of other people's poverty, right? Because they press print. They don't have to worry. This isn't, it's not like people are mining for gold. I mean, people are still mining for it, but the United States dollar is not backed by it. So in exchange for real gold or real money, they're getting paper in return. But if we go back to before the Federal Reserve note, before 1913, there was some type of equity within the system, because you have to actually mine for gold to get it, or sluicing, or whatever it's called now, where you go to a river and you shovel out sand and dirt and gravel and stuff like that, and you find little bits of gold. Either way, it costs labor, actual physical manual labor, to get it. So when you find it, of course it's worth a lot, because it took a lot to get. But when you press print on something, it's not really worth anything except the material that it's made out of. And when you see that the United States dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power, you see that it's really only worth the paper and the ink that it's made of. But when you mine for gold, gold will always be the value of gold. You can't print gold. That's why it actually has value, because it's hard to get. When something is overly saturated, everybody knows the value of it goes down. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. I was going to use this example, but that's too controversial. Everybody knows that if 10 people are selling the same thing, you know, especially like when you look at like I think there's certain businesses that say, you know, if you find this product cheaper than ours, we'll match it. So the fact that multiple people are selling this item, the value of it goes down. But to ensure that you shop with them, they're gonna lower their price. Why? Because the market's oversaturated with that item, which is why the value of it is continuously going down. Right? It's I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. So when someone can just print as many of these at will, the value of it will always continue to go down because it's not backed by anything, right? So those who press print in an economy that is based on this will always be rich. You and I will never be rich. We will never be rich unless we submit to this fraudulent system and essentially sell your soul to profit or to benefit from the system that is designed to keep people exactly where they are, unless of course you submit. And the reason why I say that is because most people, like as an example, when people get this information, like any within the so-called conscious community, you know, people often sell packages, right? Because that's how they make their fiat in the system where you have to work to live, you have to be a slave to live, because the system is based on peonage. You know, and as opposed to that, this is why most of our people are so like geared towards some type of entertainment, whether it be rap, acting, or whatever it is, because they see it as a way to make fiat fast. Because our people are so we've been bred to worship entertainment, sports, you know, movies, TV shows, music, things like that. So knowing that the owners of financial assets make this hard for us to get, we're always trying to figure out a way to make as much of this as possible and as fast as possible. You know, this is why, you know, people go into drugs and things like that. But the system is designed to keep us in this state of constant lack or constant want, so that way we go to extremes to get it. And it's fucking disgusting, to be honest. And please, I'm sorry about my language, but it's absolutely what it is. It's disgusting, because there's men, women, and children that are dying because they don't have this. When they just print it, it's not. It's like I said, it's not like it's gold. It's not like there's a limited supply of this. It's not like in order to get more, they have to send people to the mines and search for it, and people dying in mines and stuff like that. There's no risk at all. So the fact that people are dying because of it, it's disgusting. The fact that they burn millions of this a day is disgusting. When people are starving because they don't have it, people are depressed because they don't have it, and the system was designed to do that. It was designed to cause these things so that way what? The rich stay rich, and the poor stay poor. And if you ever want to go from from poor to rich, you have to jump through the hoops that they established, the hoops that they set up, right? And to kind of talk about it briefly, when you look at the Fair Tax Act, which is a new one, there's been, just like this bill to define the dollar and as a fixed weight of gold, it has been introduced almost every single year. So just look up Fair Tax Act of 1999, you'll see it. Fair Tax Act of 2019, you'll see it. Fair Tax Act of 2023, you'll see it, because they just keep admitting the same thing, right? But when you look at the tax system based on this, which doesn't make sense, because if you just press, if taxes is to support the government, right? Because the government is not for profit. If taxes are to support the government in order for the government to do its job, to pay officials, to pave the roads, to fund the military, to fund the Department of Agriculture, to fund the Department of Education, etc. If taxes is needed for that, but those same people just press print, then why do they need your tax dollars? Now, when they couldn't press print, when it was actual gold and silver, then you and I or other people we could make the investment to mine gold, and in that do us trading, etc., etc., etc. The corporations that are required to pay taxes would pay taxes to the government because it's predicated on the economy, right? And this is why it says here. This is why it says right here. Look, it says right here. The American economy needs a stable dollar, fixed exchange rates, and money supply controlled by the market, not the government. The market is the people. The market is the people on their own initiative, buying, trading, selling, mining precious metals, etc. Through that entire process, the people have decided that they need government to regulate their society. And because of all the things are happening, because of all this money exists, a percentage of business goes towards funding the government because the government doesn't exist without the people. And the government can't exist without finances, which the people have the finances. That's the market controlling the value of things. The government said, no, scratch that. We want control over the people as opposed to the people having control over us. So what we're going to do is get rid of the people's power. What's the people's power? Money. So they got rid of gold and silver. They got rid of the people's power. And they created this. A piece of paper that is not backed by anything, that they control, and they do whatever they want. So now they have power over the people. So what they did was they took the real assets of the people, being gold and silver. They made it so in order to do anything, you need this. So now they control you. It's that simple. If I want control over you, and I have 10 friends, and all my friends own grocery stores, and they own gas stations, and they own hospitals, and they own any type of commercial real estate, and I say to my 10 friends, hey, if people want to buy, rent, or sell anything to, from, or with you, you have to only accept Jamal dollars, but I'm the only one that prints it. Who will forever be in charge? Probably the person named Jamal, because he prints the Jamal dollars. And then if I pay private contractors who are armed to say, hey, anyone printing Jamal dollars without my express authority, arrest them, well, then that ensures that Jamal dollars are secured and only printed by Jamal. Well, then who always benefits? Jamal always benefits. Likewise, with the Federal Reserve note, if they print as much as they want and they stop you from printing it, but they make it so that way your everyday cost of living is dependent on this, then who is your master? Who controls you? Who rules you? Who do you work for? Because it doesn't make sense if I'm government and I print Jamal dollars. I print as much as I want without limit. The only limit is my own discretion, which means, and I'm subject to greed because I'm a human being. I print Jamal dollars, and I make it so the only way for you to live is if you have Jamal dollars, and the only way to get it is through me. What does that mean? That means I control everything you do. That means I control what you have access to, what you don't have access to. I can control how much you can eat. I can control how far you can travel. I can control how many children you can have. I can control what types of relationships you have. I can control the problems of that relationship. I can control generational wealth, how you pass wealth down. Why? because every single thing you do is predicated on Jamal dollars, right? And let's look at everything. In order to live, what do you need? In order to eat, what do you need? In fact, when most people talk about relationships today, 2023, there's an argument of, well, men need to be providers. What are you providing with? Because it's not like all of you viewing, we could all form a mining company and then just go out and mine for gold and silver, and then with the gold and silver that we got, we take it home with us, we split it up with how many of us that there are, we all become rich now. That doesn't exist. We can't do that anymore. Back in the day, you could do that. Oh yeah, look, we found all this gold, and now we can go trade it and buy things with this gold. We could buy houses with this gold. We could buy food with this gold. We could buy horses and cars and whatever, carriages. You can't do that now. You can't mine for this. And then even if you do mine for gold, guess what you need to live? This. So now whoever prints this is affecting the value of gold because they made it so you have to live with this only. You can't go to the store and buy food with gold. They're not accepting that. Why? Because like I said earlier, the individuals that have financial interest in the Federal Reserve also own the drugstores, the food stores, the pharmacies, the dealerships, the mechanics stores, mechanic shops, whatever you want to call it. And if they don't, they live in a system where someone does, and now they have their own independent mechanics shop. But guess what? Since all the major corporations are only accepting this, and you can't make your own, well, then you have to submit. What type of fairness or equality or equity exists in that? Have you ever played the game Monopoly? They've created a monopoly with this, and they got a bunch of, and this is why they say I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist because it's not really a conspiracy. I mean, it is a conspiracy because people have conspired together to cause this, but it's not a theory. It's proven. This is why the rich people control things, because they do. And this is why there's corruption within the system, because most of the politicians that become in office, they get endorsed by these rich people, so that way the politicians create policy that benefit who? The rich people. So now the government and the rich are in bed together. So the rich stay rich. And the only way for you to become rich is if you play their game. And since it's their game, who do you have to submit to? You have to submit to them. Even though none of it is based on inequity, none of it's based on any type of equality, none of it's based on any type of fairness, which is exactly why we're in the situation that we're in today. It's not that complicated. You don't have to go to college and study and have some type of financial literacy degree. You don't have to have any type of degree to comprehend this. It's simple. If I make it so that way you have to live on Jamal dollars and I'm the only one that can print it, then I will forever be in control of your life. And I could be 20 million miles away. It doesn't matter. So long as I have the people in place to ensure that they only accept this, the people in place to ensure that if you're making your own version of this, that they deal with you and create the belief that it's real and require that every goods and service be paid in this, well, then I'll forever control you. Thus, poverty can be induced deliberately. Because remember, there's a trickle-down policy with whoever the main bank of the Federal Reserve and its member banks, which most banks were forced. When you read again, when I go over the I forgot what the videos I called it on YouTube. I call them I think I just call them Federal Reserve banking. I read the presidential orders of them forcing state banks, independent banks to be under the Federal Reserve Bank. So every single bank is under the Federal Reserve Bank. That's why it's called central banking. There's no more independent banks. There never will be post 1933. All of them have been forced to only accept this. And when you read the the orders by the president, I'm not going to read them again. But if you just look up the House Resolution, not House Resolution, what is it? It wasn't a resolution. It was a presidential something. I forgot what it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. Most people know what I'm talking about. When you read that order, you'll see where banks were prohibited from accepting any gold or silver coin, and any gold or silver coin that they did have, they had to give to the federal government. So that was the federal government seizing power over people. Whereas before, like I said in the other example, if all the viewers, if we all decided to go mine for some gold, well, since we have the gold, we can create our own bank because we have the gold. You can't do that now. You have to have this, which they print at will. So it's a cyclical thing. It's a cycle of us being poor, them being rich no matter what, because they can print as much as they want. And then when people don't accept their banking system, they declare war on them to force them to do it. It's that simple. And this is how poverty is artificially induced. And when you look at most farms, the government subsidizes most farms to produce certain crops. So the government, since they can just print as much as they want, they can say, hey, yeah, we'll pay you we'll pay you to only grow corn. We'll pay you to only grow strawberries. So as opposed to there being like, competition within the agricultural industry, whatever you don't make up for, the government will give you anyway. So now if I'm growing corn, strawberries, potatoes, tomatoes, etc., but the demand isn't there because that farm is producing nothing but corn, and since they can sell corn at a cheap rate that I can't in order for them to live because they get subsidized by the government, I can never be an independent farmer. I would always have to go to the Department of Agriculture. Why? Because the Department of Agriculture is part of the same system that prints as much as this as they want. And then when you read the Fair Tax Act of 2019, 1999, 2023, etc., you'll see where these tax brackets that they've just created based on this promotes the continued dominance of large corporations over small business owners. And this is why small business owners will never, ever, ever be at the level of these mega corporations, because they believe in the system as opposed to controlling and manipulating the system for their own benefits. That's where you and I fall in, the victims of the system. And like I said, unless we're rappers, entertainers, etc., 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 or we submit to the system and sell other people out. So I don't really need to give you examples. You see it yourself. Look around. It's not a coincidence that your grandmother was poor. Your grandmother's mother was poor. Your mother's poor. You're poor. Your children are going to be poor. That's not a coincidence. And then, like I went over before, it's on my website, riseofthemoors.org. When you look at redlining and how, through the construction of highways and stuff like that, our people were forced out of homes that they owned and forced into either having a mortgage or living in the projects. You see how our wealth was taken from us by force under the guise of law, which is why it's called color of law. And this is why, Noble Drew Ali came and said all the stuff that he said. Because when we enforce the Constitution as an example, this becomes, it already is void, but this becomes no longer in circulation. But you have to know first. And this is why Rise of the Moors is a civic organization to teach the people things that they may not know. So that way, over time, hopefully within the next 15 generations, things will change. But in order for things to change, you have to change your mindset. And the prophet that I believe in, which I believe in all prophets, but one of the most recent prophets, Noble Drew Ali, who was a Moorish American, said, in order to change a people, you must change their literature. And this is why I'm showing you the literature. This is why I've written several books to inform people of these things, because they affect our everyday lives. And sometimes, you know, like I have family members and relatives who always complain, like, and I complain too, why do we have to work to live? Or, you know, why is it that I used to be able to spend $300 on groceries and feed my whole family, and now I can't? Like, why is that? The why is because there are human beings who are controlling the value of things at your detriment and to their benefit. That's why. It's not because God hates you. It's not because you're a terrible person. It's because there are people within positions of government that are supposed to be honorable and noble positions that are doing bad things. Because just like, or just how poverty is induced, artificially induced by this could also be used to benefit people. So it's not necessarily that this itself is evil. It's the intent of people printing this is what's evil. Because if they were just honest, which, you know, they admit within Congress that they've caused the Great Depression, this has lost 97% of its value. So they are honest to an extent. But most, if not all of us, went through the general education system, public schools, and none of us were taught a hint of civics or law or any type of law and history taught together. We weren't taught any of that. So we don't necessarily see how this is affecting us, but we know it's affecting us. We just can't explain it. And that's why we're kept ignorant. It's deliberately done. So that way those who have some type of financial literacy or know-how, they can become the rulers, which we already know what most of them look like, and we don't. And the only way for us to become part of their upper class of rulership is if we assimilate into their way of thinking, their culture, and accepting their system. And that's why this thing is just perpetual, because the poor people are forced to stay poor and ignorant. And then they already acknowledge that even those who have some type of intelligence amongst us, we basically have no way out, because the bulk of us are ignorant to this information. So again, the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor, unless the poor finally decide to do something about it, which they're not somehow poor enough to say, hey, we need to change things. And then, of course, we have strategies of war, such as controlled opposition. So when people wake up to these things, they'll ensure that there are people in place to help guide these resistance movements into assuring that nothing real actually takes place. So, you know, there's I'll just leave it at that. You know, there's the encouraged marching and praying and protesting the executive branch of government. Meanwhile, the legislature is the one doing all of this. They're the ones that created the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve System. They're the ones that create the policies that regulate them to a certain extent, because they also regulate themselves. You know, we should be addressing those things as opposed to just saying, hey, Donald Trump is racist. Hey, Joe Biden is sleepy. Hey, you know, things that don't actually matter, things that don't actually affect our everyday lives. But this actually affects our everyday life. It affects my life. It affects your life. And, you know, although we teach that this is not money, it's true that it's not money, we still need it to live. That's just a fact. We need it to live. And this is why, you know, we see a lot of people within the conscious movement selling information. And I mean, just like you pay, well, you don't really pay for school. The schools pay for themselves, but you're taught that your taxes pay for the schools, but that's not really how it works. Most people who want to detach from the system try to detach somehow by being some form of an entrepreneur, which is good, but it's not the final solution. The final solution is to get rid of this and to back it by gold. But in the meantime, we all need to eat and we all need to live. So how are we doing so? And that's the fundamental problem. So there's a lot of Moors out there that will call other Moors dirty for selling packages and selling information. And I could understand that, but I could also understand why they're doing it. Because most people don't want to work a 9 to 5 and live paycheck to paycheck, which is exactly how the system is designed to force you to live paycheck to paycheck and stay poor. Most people don't want to live like that. So they'll create a $500 quote unquote sovereignty package that they don't necessarily call a sovereignty package, or they'll create, seminars or webinars or whatever they're calling it nowadays, and they'll create Patreons, etc., and they'll have you donate to them so that way they can continue to give you information. But the problem isn't that part. The problem is the people not then utilizing this information to make a change. They're just staying in the spoon-fed stage of, I'm going to continue to invest in this conscious person's information. They may be somehow, they're benefiting off of you financially, but your conditions still aren't changing because you're not necessarily taking the proper action to change your conditions. So as an example, all of these people with, hundreds of thousands of followers on various social media websites, Twitch, Patreon. I'm not really familiar with Patreon, to be honest, but Patreon, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. As they're teaching this information, they should be encouraging their listeners to take this newly found information or this conscious information regarding how this is not money, uh, where you are, teach as many people as you can where you are, and then run for office at the city level, just to start, just to get a feel for politics. And then at the city level, whether you become a city councilman or woman or alderman or woman, or the mayor of the city or whatever town you live in, you can then begin to utilize this knowledge of how the United States dollar is not real money, and you can create some type of policy that actually benefits people, or even on a state level, you can create policies that actually benefit people. As an example, if you're the governor of whatever state, or if you're the mayor of whatever city, or if you have been elected to the legislative body of whatever city or state, you can propose a bill that puts an end to state taxes, which will in turn affect every person in the state or city that you live in. Well, obviously not on the city level because most cities, excuse me, most cities don't have the constitutional authority to levy, assess, or collect taxes, but the states do. So if the states say, "Hey, we already know whatever position you're, whether you're the governor or the House of Representatives or the Senate of the state," you can say, "Listen, to all my constituents that put me in office, you know that this is not real. You know that the Federal Reserve prints as much as they want. You also know that the federal government allocates millions of these dollars, Federal Reserve notes, to every state every year, which is why we're able to do most things through, like the HUD program, Housing and Urban Development, or the American Rescue Plan Act. Whatever, you can just Google search whatever city or state you live in, the federal government issuing that city or state millions of dollars. So since you know that the federal government prints as much as they want, we are going to propose legislation within this state that we are no longer going to tax income. What does that mean? That means every single human being who's working in that state will automatically receive way more money a week or on a monthly basis, depending on how they get paid. Why? Because out of the 37% of their taxes being taken out, the state is no longer doing it. Based on the Constitution, based on the fact that the United States dollar gets printed at will. That's how, through these conscious individuals, all of you viewers of these conscious individuals can then take action where you are and implement change in real time. And if any one of you decided to run for office at the city, state level, and you're speaking like that and you're campaigning, come on, bro. Who wouldn't vote for a candidate saying, I'm going to end state tax on income? As a matter of fact, if these conscious community people with the amount of followings that they had, if they actually used that knowledge in real time to run for office, well, then it wouldn't just be followers on social media. It would be actual change in real time, real life, actual change in real life. That's what at least the Moorish movement is supposed to be about. Real practical change in real life. Not just rhetoric online. We're supposed to take this information and make change. And an example of that is with Prophet Noble Drew Ali. There's a picture of Prophet Noble Drew Ali at Unity Hall, 3140 Indiana Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, where he's in the middle. Oscar the Priest is to his left, but when as you're looking at it, it's to the right, but he's to the Prophet's left. And Louis B. Anderson is to the right of the Prophet, but as you're looking at the picture, he's on the left. Oscar Stanton the Priest was a U.S. congressman for Illinois who was put in office by Moors. And when you read Prophet Noble Drew Ali's literature, he says, amongst us, you must declare your nationality, which means Oscar Stanton the Priest was what? A Moor. Because there's no way you're at Unity Hall sitting this close to the Prophet in an official picture and you're not a Moor. It's just not happening. And likewise, Louis B. Anderson was an alderman, or what you may know as city councilman, for the city of Chicago. And at first, Oscar Stanton the Priest was the alderman for Chicago, but I assume, I don't know for sure, I assume Prophet Noble Drew Ali encouraged him to run for congressman, and with the 3,000 Moors that lived in Chicago alone, I'm pretty sure those votes helped, and in his place at City Hall, Louis B. Anderson would run for office. And when you read the newspaper of the Moorish Science Temple of America, you'll see where Prophet Noble Drew Ali encouraged Moors to elect Anderson. And there's a picture of Louis B. Anderson there, and then he was made the city councilman for that specific ward on the south side of Chicago. And then, of course, there are estimated numbers of 30,000 members of the Moorish Science Temple of America during Prophet Noble Drew Ali's time. So if we're talking about Oscar Stanton the Priest running for congressman as a Moorish American, it's safe to say he had at least 3,000 of those votes, if not the full 30,000 by Moorish Americans. So there's a precedent for us to run for office where we are. And what other options do we have? Because just talking online, we're not getting anywhere. It's good to inform people through social media, but if we're just giving people information and then not encouraging them to take action, as in run for office where you are, then no change is going to actually happen. And here's a perfect example. I had a court hearing May 22nd, and I was speaking to Judge Deacon. And I said, listen, I filed a motion months ago requesting the court and the prosecutor to stop referring to me as a sovereign citizen because they haven't proven that I'm a sovereign citizen and is jeopardizing my status as innocent till proven guilty. He said out of his own mouth that the term sovereign citizen has no legal standing and has no legal status. And then I had brought up how, well, another judge from the same court referred to me as a sovereign citizen and used that to justify I said use it to justify him denying my motion. And when you read his motion, he specified that I was a sovereign multiple times, sovereign citizen multiple times. And he said, well, he essentially said, well, I can't speak for other judges, but in my mind, to my knowledge, it has no legal standing. So we can see how, based on the individual and the knowledge that they have, it affects people's rights. Because I was labeled a sovereign citizen since I was arrested. And the term has been used against me in court during almost every single preliminary proceeding and has affected me in a negative way. Whereas this judge finally, and he just so happens to be the trial judge, which means now the term will no longer be used in front of a jury because obviously the jurist will pose questions of what is this and why is this person being labeled that with no proof. So, they're playing the game. But anyway, we can see how an individual's mindset who's holds a seat of power affects people in real time. So now if you're an individual who's been studying this conscious stuff, or whatever you want to call it, for years, and you say, you know what, I'm going to try to be a judge, and I'm going to make decisions actually based on the Constitution, well, then guess what begins to change? The system that we live in begins to change. That's how we make change. Likewise, run for any type of legislative body where you live. Why? Because these are the people creating these corrupt laws that are jeopardizing us. That's why. It's not the executive branch writing it. It's not the judicial branch writing it. It's the legislative branch writing it. Hold on. Let me get the door. I'm live just now. Hi, my girl. That's a beautiful baby. I'm live.
When she saw, when she saw we were coming home, she said,
hi, baby. You excited?
Aww. The other little one's acting. Oh, he's sitting on the sidewalk.
You gonna?
Yeah.
Hey, hold on. Let me get it. She's going upstairs by herself.
Yeah.
Go.
Oh, okay. Come on, you want to come up with us? Go ahead. Go up the stairs with me. Shorty has to pick him up because he's sitting under. She's refusing to go anywhere.
Is she coming? She's coming? Or?
No, I was just taking him so that way, she can go handle her job.
Yeah. My baby's saying up.
Yep.
Good job.
She fell asleep on the bus. She was doing a little,
My daughter saying up as she walks up the stairs. Anyway. Forgot what I was saying. Run for office. Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's it. Peace. My wife's back, so I'm going to go tend to my wife. Peace.